Hello everyone, Miss Carol here again. Thank you so much for joining me as we continue our stories through the kings of Israel. We know that if we review last week, King Saul and three of his sons, Jonathan included, died in a battle, didn't they? And so David then, with Saul dead, David is finally anointed king. First though, he was only anointed king over Judah because still some of Saul's sons and also ones that were loyal to him fought against David being the king over all of Israel. So he was only king over Judah for about 7 years, but then the Israelites made him king over all Israel. All right, so we know that David, even after he became king, he continued to be a brave warrior. As a king, he went out to battle all the time. And the Bible even tells us about the mighty men that were warriors with him and the mighty deeds that they did. And sometimes you need to go and read that because it's really fascinating what those men were able to accomplish as they fought against Israel's enemies. The Bible tells us that King David and his men were able to defeat the Philistines, and they won back Israel's land and towns from them that the Philistines had taken away years ago. And he was able to defeat the Moabites as well. If you remember too, last week, David was able to bring the Ark of God to Jerusalem, even though it was just in a tent. At least he brought it to Jerusalem, where he lived in his palace. He kept his promise to his best friend Jonathan by sending for his son, Jonathan's son Mephibosheth, who was disabled, if you remember, in both legs. And he told Mephibosheth that from now on, you're going to live in the palace with me, and you're going to eat at my table as though you were the son of a king. And so he kept Mephibosheth with him ever after that. And when David had grown old, God told David that he is choosing his son Solomon. David has many sons, but Solomon is the one that God chose to be the next king. So David called Solomon in before him and told him that, but he said that I very much wanted to build a temple, a house for God. I'm living in a beautiful cedar palace, and God is still in a tent in the tabernacle in Gibeon. And he said, I wanted to build a temple, but God told me, and here's what God said to him: you shall not build a house for my name, David, because you have been a man of war and you have shed much blood. However, the Lord God of Israel chose me above all the house of my father to be king over Israel forever. For he has chosen the tribe of Judah, the house of my father, and among all the sons of my father, he was pleased with me to make me king over all Israel. And of all my sons, he has chosen you, Solomon, to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. And so it's going to be David's son Solomon who would build the temple. God said, your son Solomon will be the one. He will have rest from all his enemies, thanks to David, and he will not be a man of war. He will be able to build my temple. God did help David design the temple. The Bible tells us that God's Spirit told David the plans to the temple like blueprints, and he was able to draw them out, and he knew exactly how God wanted it to be. You remember when Moses was on Mount Sinai and God showed him exactly the plans for the tabernacle and everything that should be in it? That's exactly what God did with David as far as the temple. The difference between a tabernacle and a temple, the word tabernacle means tent, doesn't it? And the temple is going to be made of stones, and it's going to be a permanent building there in Jerusalem. But even though, David tells him, even though I'm not the one to build it, I'm going to get it all ready for you. So David began gathering all the building materials from all over, the finest wood, stone, gold, and bronze. And he hired thousands of men to gather these materials before he died. And we're going to be talking next week all about the temple and how alike it was, and in some ways how different it was from the tabernacle. But we'll be discussing that next week. And so we know that Solomon is to be the next king. However, when David was old, Adonijah, who was one of David's sons, decided to make himself the king. And so he managed to get Joab, who was David's commander-in-chief of his army, to agree with him. And also Abiathar the priest. So the three of them made a plan to make Adonijah the next king. So Adonijah made a sacrifice and invited most of the leaders of Judah and all of his brothers except Solomon. And he had a great feast for himself. And he crowned himself king. And when Nathan the prophet heard what Adonijah had done, he told Bathsheba, who was David's wife and Solomon's mother, to go and tell David, because something has to be done. And so Bathsheba went to David and told him, we've got to do something. If we don't, Adonijah is going to make himself the king. And David said, go and anoint my son Solomon. And so we read that King David said, call in Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah, son of Jehoiada. And when they came before the king, he said to them, take your Lord's servants with you, and have Solomon my son ride on a mule, and take him down to Gihon. And there have Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and shout, long live King Solomon. Then you are to go up with him, and he is to come and sit on my throne and reign in my place. I have appointed him ruler and king over all Israel and Judah. And they said, amen. May the Lord, the God of my Lord the king, declare it. As the Lord was with David, so may he be with Solomon, to make his throne even greater than the throne of you, King David. And so the three of them went down, and Zadok the priest took the horn of oil from the sacred tent and anointed Solomon. Then they sounded the trumpet, and all the people shouted, long live King Solomon. And the people were rejoicing. Well, of course, not everyone was rejoicing, right? You can imagine who isn't. Adonijah and the people with him. How do you think they're feeling now? They're afraid. They realize, oh no, we tried to take over and it didn't work, and now we've been found out. We better run. Adonijah realized that his attempt to be made king had fallen apart, and then he begged for mercy, and he promised he would be faithful to the new king. But Solomon knew that was not going to work, so he had Adonijah killed, and he had him put to death. And he also had Joab, David's old commander-in-chief, put to death, and Abiathar the priest, who anointed Adonijah, he was sent away. So now Solomon is king. And we're going to read in 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. So when the time came near for David to die, he called Solomon to him And he gave a charge to Solomon. In other words, he's going to tell him, this is what I need you to do. I am about to die, to go the way of all the earth. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him. Keep all of his decrees and his commands, his laws and his regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may do well in all that you do, and wherever you go, the Lord will keep his promises to me to keep a descendant on the throne. If your sons watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully, then there will always be one of my descendants and one of your descendants on the throne. But they have to follow the Lord with all their heart and soul. And so David then died, and they buried him in the city of David, which would be in Jerusalem. And David had reigned 40 years over Israel, 7 years first over just Judah, and 33 in Jerusalem, for a total of 40. So Solomon sat on the throne of his father David, and his rule was firmly established. All right, so now Solomon is the king. And one of the earliest things that we know that was written about Solomon was that he went to the high place in Gibeon and he offered sacrifices to God. And we read that in 1 Kings chapter 3, starting in verse 5. And it says that the king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices, for that was the most important high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. And at Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream. And God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you, and you will have it. Wow. Can you imagine? Here is God coming to Solomon and saying, what do you want? Just ask me. I'll give you whatever you ask. If that happened to you, what do you think you would ask for? Wow, that would be hard, wouldn't it? Would you want to be rich? Would you want to be famous? Would you want to live a long time? Maybe you'd want to be sure all your enemies were dead so they would never bother you again. What would you want to ask for? A room full of toys? What would you want? What would you want? And so here is what King Solomon says. Now, Lord, my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, but I am only a little child. And he's describing himself. And I do not know how to carry out all of my duties as king. Your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too many to even count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to be able to govern your people and to understand between right and wrong. For who is able to lead this great people of yours? And the Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, for wisdom, and not for a long life, or to be wealthy for yourself, and you haven't asked for the death of your enemies, but you've asked to be able to understand right from wrong when you are delivering justice to your people. Because of that, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and a discerning heart. Now, the word discerning means to have the ability to listen patiently to all sides of a problem. When people come to you with a problem, that's going to give you the ability to listen to first what one person says and then what the other person says, and be able to come to true and wise decisions. So he was going to give him that discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for. I will give you both wealth, lots of money, and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me, and you keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. And then Solomon woke up, and he realized that it had been a dream. But it was true. God had come to him in a dream. Is that what you would have asked for? To be wise and to make good decisions? I don't think many of us would have asked for something like that, would we? We would have been a little more selfish, I'm afraid. So that was a very good thing for him to ask for. We realize from history that Solomon was probably between 18 years old and 20 years old when he became the king of all of Israel. So many people, there were too many to count. Now, you probably know some teenagers that are 18 years old, and you know what's getting ready to happen in their lives in a few months? They're probably getting ready to graduate from high school. And so that's a big accomplishment, but I'm going to ask you this. How many of you would want the President of the United States to be someone who had just graduated from high school? I don't think I would want my president to, someone leading my country, to be 18 years old. I don't think they would understand how to do anything, but they didn't know that Solomon had asked God for wisdom, and so God's going to give him wisdom, and not only that, but he's going to become the wisest man in the world. And the first thing that the Bible tells us happened with Solomon was one day when two women came to King Solomon for him to judge between the two of them. Each said that they lived together, the women lived together, and they each had a baby boy 3 days apart. And the one woman said that during the night, the other woman rolled over on her baby and he died. And she said, she got up in the middle of the night without me knowing it and came to my bed and traded the dead baby for my live baby and took my baby back to bed with her. So when I woke up in the morning, here was this dead baby, but I realized that wasn't my baby. And I told her, you have my baby. What did you do? You traded, you rolled over and killed your baby accidentally, I know, but that's my baby. And the other woman said, I don't know what you're talking about. The live one is my baby. The dead one is yours. Wow. They were the only two people in the house at the time, other than the babies. How in the world is Solomon going to know who's right and who's wrong? Well, remember, God gave him wisdom. Now he's going to ask them to do something very, very strange. So he tells his servants, bring me a sword. Wait a minute, a sword? How's that going to fix things? He said, take the living baby and cut the baby in half. Give one half to one woman, one half to the other. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine? What would you do? What would you do if you knew that your baby, the one mother knows, that's her baby that's alive? What would you do if you knew that king was about to cut your baby in half? You would do what any mother would do. And that's what she did. Oh, no, no, no. "Oh no, my king, don't hurt the baby. Don't kill the baby. Go ahead and give it to her, but please don't hurt my baby." And the other woman said, "No, go ahead and cut the baby in half. If I can't have a baby, she can't have one either." So how do you know? How could he tell from the attitude of the two mothers which one was the mother of the live baby? Well, of course, Solomon knew that the real mother would never want her baby harmed. She would never want that baby hurt. And so she would rather see the other woman keep her baby as long as he was safe. He said, "Give the baby to his real mother." And this showed everyone that Solomon indeed had great, great wisdom. Another time, we learn about a queen that came from a country far away named Sheba. We don't know if she was from Africa or Asia, but we do know it was a long way from Israel. But she had heard about Solomon's great wealth and about his wisdom, and she wanted to see about it for herself. So she ate at the king's table, she talked to Solomon, and she told everyone, "It was a true report what I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. I didn't believe until I came and saw for myself. Happy are your people, happy are your servants. Blessed be the Lord your God, who set you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord has loved Israel forever. You are full of righteousness and justice." And the Bible tells us in 1 Kings chapter 4, God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and understanding, as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than all the wisdom of all the people of the earth, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else on earth, and his fame spread to all the nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He could speak about plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He spoke about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. From all nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard about his wisdom. That's amazing, isn't it? Well, next week, we're going to talk about Solomon and the building of the temple. So come back and join us next week. You won't want to miss this. Love you. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. Be the best that you can be always. Bye-bye.